My name is Margaret Holloway. I am 72 years old, and last winter, I realized I had never felt lonelier in my entire life. Not after my mother died, not after the children moved away, not even after retirement. It happened on a Tuesday evening while I sat beside my husband in complete silence. The television was on, some old game show neither of us was really watching. Frank sat in his recliner with a blanket over his legs. I sat on the couch knitting something I would probably never finish. And for nearly 2 hours, we did not say a single word to each other, not one. At some point, I looked over at him and thought, when did we stop being husband and wife and become two strangers sharing furniture? That thought stayed with me all night. Maybe you have felt this too. At this age, silence can become heavier than shouting. Frank and I had been married for 48 years. 48. That number sounds beautiful when people hear it. Our neighbors used to smile and say, "You two are an inspiration." I always smiled back politely, but people only see what happens in public. They do not see the quiet parts. They do not see the distance that slowly grows over years, like cracks in old walls. Frank had been a railroad mechanic most of his life, a hardworking man, reliable, serious. He woke up early, paid bills on time, never drank too much, never cheated. To the world, he was a good husband. And maybe he was, but somewhere along the road, he stopped seeing me, or maybe I stopped seeing him too. I still do not know which happened first. We lived in a small town outside of Ohio, a quiet place with old diners, faded gas stations, and people who had known each other for decades. Nothing changed much there, except people. People changed slowly. Our daughter Emily lived 3 states away in North Carolina with her own family. Our son Ryan rarely called unless he needed help with something. That sounds harsh, but I learned not to expect much. Children grow up. They build lives that no longer need you every day. That is normal. Still, the house became painfully quiet after they left, especially in winter. Winter always made loneliness feel larger. The mornings were the hardest. Frank woke before sunrise every day, even after retirement. Old habits. I would hear the coffee machine start in the kitchen, then cabinet doors opening, then silence again. No conversation, no good morning, just routines. I usually stayed in bed a few extra minutes staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I wondered if anyone would notice if I simply disappeared for a few days. That thought frightened me the first time it entered my mind, but after a while, it became familiar. One morning, I walked into the kitchen wearing my old blue robe. Frank sat at the table reading the newspaper. I poured myself coffee and said softly, "I didn't sleep well." He nodded without looking up, just nodded. That was all. Something inside me sank, not because he was cruel. Frank was never cruel. It was worse than that. He had become emotionally absent, like a man slowly fading while still sitting right in front of me. I missed being noticed, not admired, not praised, just noticed. A few weeks later, I found an old photo album in the closet upstairs. Dust covered the edges. I sat on the bedroom floor, flipping through pages for almost an hour. There we were at 23, Frank smiling with thick, dark hair, me wearing a yellow dress I had sewn myself. We looked happy, not perfect, but connected. There was one photo from a camping trip in 1981. Frank had his arm around my shoulders. I remember that trip clearly because we laughed the entire weekend after our tent collapsed during a storm. Back then, he laughed easily. I stared at that picture so long my eyes filled with tears. Not because I wanted to be young again. I simply missed feeling important to someone. That evening, I tried to talk to him. Really talk. He was fixing a drawer in the garage. I stood near the doorway, holding my sweater tightly around myself. "Frank," I said quietly. I feel like we don't talk anymore." He kept working. "We talk." "No," I said, "not really." He sighed softly. That sigh hurt more than yelling would have. "What do you want me to say, Margaret?" I stood there frozen, because honestly, I did not know. I wanted him to ask how I was feeling. I wanted him to look at me the way he once did. I wanted warmth, concern, something. Instead, he returned to tightening screws. The conversation ended before it even began. That night I cried silently in the bathroom so he would not hear me. At 72 years old, imagine hiding tears from the person you shared almost half a century with. Loneliness inside marriage is a strange kind of pain. You cannot explain it to people easily,
Because technically, you are not alone. But emotionally, you feel invisible. Days continued like that. Cold mornings, quiet dinners, television noise filling empty spaces.
One Friday evening, Emily called. I could hear children screaming happily in the background. "Mom, you okay?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart," I lied automatically. Mothers become experts at lying gently. She told me about school events, soccer practice, busy schedules. I listened carefully. Then she suddenly asked, "How's Dad?" I looked across the living room. Frank was asleep in his chair. The television flickered across his face. "He's fine," I answered softly. But after we hung up, I sat there staring at him. And for the first time in my life, I wondered whether staying married and feeling emotionally abandoned was lonelier than actually living alone. That thought terrified me, because once certain thoughts enter your heart, they never fully leave. A week later, something small happened. Small things often matter most. I baked Frank's favorite peach pie from scratch, the same recipe his mother taught me when I was 24. The kitchen smelled warm for hours. For a moment, the house felt alive again. When he sat down after dinner, I placed a slice in front of him. He took one bite and nodded. "Tastes good." That was it. No smile, no memory shared, nothing. I suddenly lost my appetite. I stood quietly, carried my own plate to the sink, and stared out the kitchen window into the dark backyard. Snow had started falling softly. Behind me, I heard Frank continue eating. And in that moment, I felt completely alone at the age of 72. Not because nobody was physically there, but because the man beside me no longer reached for me emotionally. And deep down, I feared maybe he had not for many years. The next morning, I woke before Frank for the first time in years. Outside, snow covered the driveway in a thin white layer. The house felt cold despite the heater humming softly downstairs. I stood in the bathroom mirror, brushing my silver hair slowly. There was a time when I used to care how I looked for him. I remembered curling my hair before dinner, buying perfume I could barely afford, waiting by the window when he came home from work. Back then, I wanted him to notice me. Now, I could not remember the last time he truly looked at my face. At this age, people stop talking about loneliness in marriage. Young couples talk about passion. Middle-aged couples talk about stress. But older couples? Most people assume if you stayed together this long, everything must be fine. That is not always true. Sometimes people stay because leaving feels harder than enduring silence. I went downstairs quietly and made coffee. Frank entered the kitchen 10 minutes later, wearing his old brown sweater. "Morning," he muttered. "Morning." He opened the refrigerator and frowned. "We're out of milk." "I know," I answered. "I was going to go later." He nodded. That was our life now. Tiny, practical conversations. Nothing deeper. No feelings. No connection. Just survival beside each other. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store, alone. I often took longer than necessary shopping because I dreaded returning home too quickly. Maybe that sounds sad. Maybe it is. I walked slowly through the aisles, looking at things I did not need. Soup cans, holiday decorations already on clearance, cheap flowers near the front entrance. I almost bought a bouquet, then I stopped myself. For what? The house would still feel empty. As I reached for bread, I heard someone say, "Margaret?" I turned around. It was Helen Carter, an old friend from church I had not seen in months. Helen was 75 and recently widowed. Her husband passed away 2 years earlier after a stroke. She smiled warmly and hugged me tightly. "You disappeared," she said gently. I suppose I did. We stood talking near the bakery section for almost 20 minutes, and strangely, it felt good. Not because the conversation was extraordinary, it was simple, but she listened, really listened. That alone nearly made me emotional. At one point she asked, "How are things with Frank?" The question caught me off guard. I forced a smile. "Oh, same as always." But Helen kept watching me quietly. Older women notice things without words. Finally, she said softly, "You know, loneliness can exist even when somebody sleeps beside you." My chest tightened instantly. I looked down at my shopping cart. For a second, I thought I might cry right there between the bread and frozen vegetables. Instead, I laughed nervously. "Is it that obvious?" Helen touched my hand gently. "Only to people who have felt it too." That sentence stayed with me all day. When I returned home, Frank was in the garage again. always the garage, fixing tools that did not need fixing, organizing shelves already organized. I think he liked being around objects because they did not require emotional effort. Inside the house, I unpacked groceries slowly. Then I noticed something strange. The peach pie plate from the night before still sat on the table. Half the pie remained untouched. For some reason, that hurt me deeply. I do not know why. Maybe because I had tried so hard. That evening during dinner, I decided to say something honest. Not angry, just honest. "Frank," I said carefully, "do you ever feel unhappy?" He looked confused. "With what?" "With us." He stared at his plate for several seconds. Then he shrugged. "I don't know." That answer felt like ice water. Not because he said yes, not because he said no, because he genuinely seemed disconnected from the question itself. As if emotional conversations belonged to another language he never learned. I pushed food around my plate quietly. "You used to talk to me more," I whispered. Frank sighed again. "There's nothing wrong, Margaret. There is for me." He rubbed his forehead. "We're old. People change." I remember those exact words. "We're old. People change." Maybe he meant them practically, but to me it sounded like surrender. Like he had accepted emotional distance as something normal, something unavoidable. After dinner, he went to sleep in his chair again. I stayed awake alone in the kitchen for nearly an hour. The refrigerator hummed softly, the clock ticked above the stove, and suddenly I realized something painful. I had spent years waiting for him to notice my loneliness, without ever admitting how deeply it was hurting me. I think many women my age do that. We minimize our pain. We tell ourselves, he works hard, he's tired, he's just quiet, until one day we wake up emotionally starving. A few days later, Emily called again. This time, I answered while folding laundry. "Mom, you sound tired," she said immediately. "I'm all right." "No, you're not." Her voice softened. "What's going on?" I almost lied again. The words sat at the edge of my mouth, but something inside me cracked. And before I could stop myself, I whispered, "I feel lonely." There was silence on the phone. Then Emily spoke very gently. "Did something happen?" I sat down slowly on the couch. "No," I said. "That's the problem. Nothing happens anymore." I started crying quietly. Not dramatic crying, just exhausted tears. The kind that come after holding sadness inside too long. Emily listened without interrupting. I told her about the silence, the distance, the feeling of disappearing inside my own marriage. Finally, she said, "Mom, have you told Dad all this?" I looked toward the garage window. The light inside was on. Frank was still out there. "I've tried," I answered, "but it's like talking through glass." That night, Emily's words stayed in my mind. "Have you really told him?" Maybe I had not. Maybe I hinted, complained softly, dropped emotional crumbs. But had I truly opened my heart completely? I was not sure. 3 nights later, something unexpected happened. Frank forgot our anniversary. 48 years, gone from his mind entirely. I woke that morning almost hoping things might feel different. Maybe breakfast together. Maybe flowers from the grocery store. Maybe simply, happy anniversary. But the day passed normally. Coffee, silence, television, dinner, nothing. By evening, I realized he truly did not remember. That broke something inside me. Not because anniversaries are magical, but because forgetting felt symbolic, like proof that our marriage had become routine instead of relationship. Around 9 o'clock, Frank noticed me sitting quietly at the table. "You okay?" I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said softly, "Do you know what today is?" He frowned slightly. "Tuesday?" I swallowed hard. "It's our anniversary, Frank." The color drained from his face instantly. Oh God. He looked genuinely ashamed. I forgot. I nodded slowly. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he said something that stunned me. I didn't think it mattered anymore. That sentence hit harder than forgetting itself. I stared at him across the dim kitchen, and suddenly I realized maybe I was not the only lonely person in this marriage. I didn't think it mattered anymore. Frank's words stayed in the air between us. For a moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen light above the table flickered slightly, casting soft shadows across his tired face. And suddenly, he looked old to me. Not just older, old. His shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered, his hands rougher, his eyes more distant. I realized I had spent so many years focusing on my own loneliness that I had stopped wondering what life felt like for him. That thought confused me. Part of me wanted to stay angry. Another part felt unexpectedly sad. Frank looked down at the table. "I'm sorry, Margaret." His voice sounded quieter than usual. "I truly forgot." I nodded slowly but said nothing. Then, after several seconds, he added, "I suppose somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking you still cared about things like anniversaries." That hurt too, because I did care. Not about expensive dinners or gifts. I cared about being remembered, being emotionally held onto. I folded my hands tightly in my lap. "Why would you think I stopped caring?" He gave a tired shrug. "You stopped talking to me years ago." I looked up sharply. "What?" "You heard me." His voice was calm, not cruel, and somehow that made it harder. "I tried talking to you," I whispered. "No," he replied quietly. "You talked about schedules, bills, the kids, groceries, but you stopped talking to me." I felt defensive immediately. "That's not fair." Frank rubbed his forehead slowly. "Maybe not, but I think we both disappeared a little." Those words stayed with me long after we went to bed. I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Frank breathed softly beside me. It had been years since we truly spoke honestly, years since we admitted anything vulnerable. At some point, we had both quietly stepped away from each other emotionally, without even noticing when it happened. The next morning felt strange. Not better, but different, like something hidden had finally been uncovered. Frank made coffee as usual, but when he placed my mug on the table, he paused awkwardly. "You still take 2 sugars?" Such a small question, yet it nearly made me cry. Because after 48 years together, he was asking again instead of assuming. "Yes," I answered softly. He nodded. Then he sat down across from me instead of returning immediately to the newspaper. The silence between us felt uncomfortable, but not empty this time, just unfamiliar, like 2 people relearning how to exist together. After a few minutes, Frank cleared his throat. I wasn't very good at emotional things growing up. I looked at him carefully. He rarely talked about childhood. "My father never talked much either," he continued. "If something bothered him, he worked harder. That was his solution for everything." I listened quietly. "When I retired," he said slowly, "I think I stopped knowing who I was." That sentence surprised me. Frank had always seemed steady, predictable, like a man impossible to shake emotionally. But now I saw something underneath all those years of silence. Fear, loss, confusion. "I thought retirement would feel relaxing," he admitted. "Instead, I felt useless." I swallowed hard. He stared down at his coffee. The garage gave me something to do. Suddenly, so many things made sense. The endless fixing, the organizing, the emotional withdrawal. Not because he stopped caring, because he no longer understood himself. At this age, people carry loneliness differently. Some cry, some become quiet. Some disappear into routines. Frank disappeared into silence. And I disappeared into hurt. For the first time in years, I reached across the table and touched his hand gently. He looked surprised. His skin felt colder than I remembered. "We should have talked sooner," I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Yes." That afternoon, something unusual happened. Frank asked if I wanted to go for a drive, a simple drive. We had not done that together in years. Usually we only drove somewhere with purpose, doctor appointments, grocery shopping, family visits. But this time, there was no reason. We drove slowly through the countryside with old country music playing softly on the radio. Snow covered empty fields. Bare trees stretched against the gray winter sky. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Frank suddenly said, "Do you remember the camping trip when the tent collapsed?" I looked at him in surprise. "The storm in '81? A faint smile appeared on his face. "You laughed so hard you couldn't breathe." I smiled too before I could stop myself. "And you blamed me for buying the cheap tent." "It was a cheap tent," I laughed softly. A real laugh, small but real. And for the first time in years, something warm passed between us. Not passion, not magic, just connection, human connection. Sometimes that matters more. We stopped at a tiny diner outside town, the kind with cracked booths and coffee refills nobody counts. A teenage waitress called us sweetheart and honey. Frank ordered meatloaf. I ordered soup. Simple things. But sitting there across from him felt strangely emotional, because I realized how long it had been since we simply existed together without tension. At one point, Frank looked out the window quietly and said, I know I haven't been easy to live with. I stared at him. That sentence alone felt enormous. He continued softly, "When I stopped working, I think I started feeling invisible too." Invisible. The exact word I had carried silently for years. I suddenly understood something painful. We had both been standing in the same emotional storm, facing opposite directions. That realization did not erase the hurt, but it softened something inside me. On the drive home, snow began falling again, slow and gentle. Frank kept both hands on the steering wheel. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "I was scared after retirement." I looked at him carefully. Scared of what? He took several seconds to answer. Getting old. His honesty caught me off guard. Men from his generation rarely admitted fear, especially emotional fear. "I didn't know how to be useful anymore," he said quietly, and after a while, I stopped trying. I looked out the passenger window, blinking back tears, because underneath all my loneliness, I had forgotten he was aging too, not just physically, emotionally, spiritually. We returned home just before dark. As I hung my coat near the front door, Frank suddenly touched my shoulder lightly, a tiny gesture, but after years without affection, it felt enormous. "I'm glad you told me the truth," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. "So am I." That night we sat together on the couch again, the same television, the same living room, the same winter silence outside. But this time, something had shifted. Not fixed, shifted. At one point, Frank quietly reached over and held my hand. And I realized something unexpected. Sometimes marriages do not collapse all at once. Sometimes they slowly drift apart through years of exhaustion, routine, grief, and unspoken fear. But sometimes, two lonely people can still find each other again, even after decades of silence. After that winter evening, nothing changed overnight. Real life does not work that way. 48 years of silence cannot disappear in a single conversation. But something important had happened. We had finally stopped pretending. And honestly, that was the beginning. The next few weeks felt awkward sometimes, almost like learning how to live with a new person. Frank started staying in the living room more, instead of disappearing into the garage for hours. At first, we struggled to talk. We had spent so many years discussing practical things that emotional conversations felt unnatural. One morning I asked, "Did you sleep all right?" And instead of saying fine like usual, he admitted, "My back kept hurting." That may sound small, but older marriages survive through small openings, tiny moments of honesty, tiny moments of trying. One afternoon, I found him standing quietly in the hallway, looking at family photos. He pointed at a picture of Emily at age 10. "She used to follow me everywhere," he said softly. I smiled. "She adored you." He nodded slowly, but did not say anything else. Still, I noticed his eyes growing watery. At this age, emotions come differently, softer, heavier, more connected to memory. A few days later, Emily called again. This time, I sounded different immediately. "You sound lighter," she said. I smiled quietly. "I think your father and I finally started talking again." Emily laughed softly in relief. "About time." After we hung up, I sat near the window watching snow melt slowly from the yard. The world outside looked dull and gray, but inside me, something warm had begun returning. Not excitement, not youthful romance, something calmer, companionship. There is a kind of love that only older people understand. It is not loud, it does not need grand gestures. Sometimes it is simply someone bringing you tea without asking, or waiting for you before starting dinner, or saying, "Drive safely." Frank began doing small things again. One morning, he cleaned snow off my car before I left for the grocery store. Another evening, he brought me a blanket while I watched television. Neither of us mentioned these things aloud, but we both noticed, and maybe that matters most. One Sunday afternoon, we visited the cemetery where his parents were buried.
Cold wind moves softly through the trees. Frank stood silently for several minutes looking down at the graves. My eyes filled instantly with tears, not because the sentence was poetic, because it was the acknowledgement I had needed for years, to be seen, to be understood.
To know my loneliness had been real. At this age, healing often comes through very simple words. Months passed slowly, so if you are sitting beside someone tonight feeling invisible, please do not wait as long as we did. Speak gently, speak honestly, because sometimes the person beside you is lonely too. And sometimes love returns not through grand romance, but through finally being understood.